Do you both add specific aerobic style exercises, for example, bike, running, hiking, etc., for contest prep? That's a good question. Jerome, what do you do?
Yeah, usually the last 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how lean I am or how lean somebody else is, I'll add very high intensity intervals, maybe on a recumbent bike, 15, 20 seconds as hard as somebody can go, and then about a minute or so of just a moderate pace. Just let your heart rate come down a little bit. And then when you hit that 1 minute of relatively easier, then you go all out for 20 seconds. Even with cardio, I tend to think intensity is still key in terms of driving the positive adaptations. But I don't recommend, and I don't do any long duration steady state cardio leading up until a contest. To me, cardio is, it makes a small difference, but there are times to sprinkle it in, and you don't want to use it unless you need to, because the body is wonderfully adaptive, and any stimulus that you're giving your body, eventually an adaptation will take place and it'll lose its effectiveness. So you want to use it as a tool when you need to get that last little bit of fat off, before getting on stage. And I don't think people should be doing 45 to 60 minutes of cardio or intervals, 20 weeks out from a contest. Let your diet get you to like 8-ish%, and then use a little bit of cardio in that last 4 to 6 weeks to just get really razor sharp.
Yeah, that's my theory as well. I think the same. My last contest prep, very anecdotal, very nuanced. So I was getting very bad back pain then, and I started 10 months out. I shredded 4% body fat in 2 months. My cardio was walking the dog. So I'd go out twice a day, walk the dog 20 to 30 minutes. I wasn't brisk walking. It was just walking. It's just moving. So I was timing my walk. Like I was knowing I'd do about 20, 30 minutes, whatever. I wasn't counting steps or anything like that. The diet was the main driver. It's probably counts like 85% of your fat loss results would be from the diet. And I think with a lot of people, they try to push too hard, everything at once. The more levers you pull, the quicker you get results. Also, the quicker you plateau, like Jerome said, your body will adapt to that. Your metabolic rate will actually lower if you're pulling all the levers at once. So you're doing sprints, you're doing high intensity training, short rests, drop sets, supersets, I don't know, steady state cardio, and no food, like 50% food intake. You'll lose fat fast, but you'll plateau even faster. So for me, it wasn't until I'd say about month 6 out of 8 or 9, I actually started to do deliberate cardio. The reason being was because my body started to fight back, and I wanted to increase my food intake because I was in such a food deficit for such a long time. Now, my food deficit wasn't steep. My lowest point of food intake over that 9-month period was about, if you looked at calories, 3,600 per day. So that equated to 50 to 100 grams of carbs from dairy a day, something like that. That's a lot of dairy. So it was a lot of Greek yogurt, just a ridiculous amount. Whey protein, the protein was like 550 a day. Fat was about 150 at its lowest. So it's a very protein centric diet. So that's where a lot of the calories would have come from. But what I found was I had to start adding in cardio because my body has slowed down so much. So I did it incrementally, like minimal effective dose sort of principle. So I started on 10 minutes, elliptical trainer. So that, the slow one, a bit like a cross trainer, but a bit less intense, I think. Whatever intensity it was, I'd increase that. Okay, increase it again next week, just to get the same stimulus, the fat loss stimulus. I found if I didn't do that, the weight wouldn't start going down. With myself, when I get into shape, I do chase low weights. A lot of builders will say, oh, I've lost too much weight, I need to eat more food. I try to chase the weight down. My problem isn't being big enough. On stage, I'm usually one of the biggest people on stage. So I just try to be light. If the weight goes down, the chances are the fat loss is going to be there. And if we're using very powerful creatine supplementation, you're not going to lose a lot of muscle. It just doesn't really happen. Not to me anyway. So then from there, a few weeks of that, okay, I'm not getting much benefit anymore. The weight's not really going down much. Rather than push diet lower, I didn't want to push diet lower at that point. What I did was I changed the cardio equipment. So I went for a slight incline walk. started at 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then I'd increase, each time, maybe 4 or 5 minutes every few weeks. So it was the same as training, but I was just increasing the difficulty level. And by the time I think I finished, I was up to about 30 minutes, 4 times per week, 4 or 5 times per week on 10% incline walk. I wasn't sprinting. I didn't do sprint. I couldn't do sprint. My body wouldn't let me. But that's something I would have been doing. So if I had better joint health, back health, I would have been sprinting on off days, 2-to-1 ratio, 60-second walk, rest, what have you, 30-second sprint on a bike or on a treadmill, maybe, probably not. But, that's how I did it. And it was effective. It did work. It did get me in shape. But that was only because I had to add it in. It wasn't because it was a necessity. Mm-hmm. But hopefully that should be useful anyway. So I'm going to give you a background of how, why, what instance. But the diet is the main driver. But I think there is a fine definite limit where you have to stop cutting the food. I've got guidelines in my head of how low I let someone's food intake go. And the food intake, in terms of grams, if you're wondering, if you count macros, the lowest I've got anyone was about 110 protein and 100 fat in terms of grams. And that's, I think, trying to think how much she weighed. This is a female athlete, I believe, bikini athlete. So she wasn't big at all. And that was the lowest food intake. But what I did was I ramped her food intake before that point. So when she did have to cut down the food intake, it wasn't like she has medium food intake down, eating nothing. Her food intake was high because I ramped up her metabolism. I upregulated it. So effectively what we call in the carnivore space priming. That's what I did. But I just did it in a more moderate kind of way.
And kind of a second take-home point based on that question with what me and Jonathan said is the difference between people that lose weight and what bodybuilders do is, for the most part, bodybuilders aren't outworking everybody necessarily. What we're doing is just we're extremely consistent and arguably far more consistent than what most people do. We know exactly how much food we're eating. We're eating the same meals at the same time, down to gram levels of weighing your food. We're not missing workouts. We're not having anything extra. We're not doing anything outside of the plan. And then we only make adjustments to the plan when necessary. We let our diet get us as lean as it'll get us down to a certain point where we don't want to take the diet anymore. And then we add the activity in. And Jonathan's 100% right. You don't just go 0 to 100 right off the bat 6 months away from your show. That's a surefire recipe for disaster. And I think that's the mindset that a lot of people have when they're trying to make significant changes to their physique is, I have to do my 30 to 60 minutes of cardio a day. I have to go to the gym 5 days a week. I have to follow a 1,200 calorie diet. And if you try and do all of those things at once, you're just setting yourself up for failure. When if you had just followed a reasoned, principled approach of trying to eat as much food as possible while still moving in the direction that you want to go, then you can slowly make adjustments over time and see how your body reacts. Because you can always take things to a higher level. But if you just throw everything 100% right off the bat, like nobody has the willpower to stick to that long term.
Yeah, an example of that is a client I took on very recently. Now I reduced his food intake. He basically just said to me, look, I want to compete next year. I'm going to buy 6 months upfront coaching. What do I do? So I've got him on a ketogenic carnivore diet approach and no cardio. The plan is essentially I'm dropping him from about 18% body fat to about 14, 15%. Roughly, give or take. And just so I have a better visual of what he looks like with a bit less fat on his body. So I got a better idea of his shape. A simple training program, 4 sessions a week, no cardio, no extra steps, nothing complicated. He doesn't have to calculate anything. He has to follow the plan, the food list sort of thing. Then default to the macro intake if he's out. So he's got plan A, plan B, not abrasive, not too much thought process, very easy to follow. And he's asking about cardio. Should I do cardio on off days and abs? I said, no. Your food deficit is about 20 to 25% of what you're eating prior to this. Mm-hmm. So that should be significant. Now, with that much of a food deficit, I'm not holding that deficit for, say, 2 months. I'm not going to crash his metabolism because you can do that. You can slow someone's metabolism. People think it's not true, but it does happen. Now, it's not going to go to nothing, but you can slow someone down to the point they're miserable and they hate you. I don't want this guy to hate me. I'm coaching him. He's paying me money to get him in shape and to help him win a contest. So it's just to get a bit leaner, then slowly ramp the food intake back up whilst keeping it clean, but keeping it simple at the same time. It's all just simple stuff. Simple stuff.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.